Good afternoon, everybody. This is Joe from the MiddleGround Mic. We got a real special guest here. His name is Adam Swart. Is that how you say it?
That's right. That's correct.
All right. He's the founder of Crowds on Demand. I was definitely reading up on a lot of your stuff, and it is a very interesting topic slash situation. Give everybody a little bit of a clue about who you are and what you're about.
Sure. Crowds on Demand, largest protest company in the country. We do PR stunts for companies to get publicity for them. We do advocacy. We create advocacy groups, from the ground up to advocate for causes. We're best known for our unconventional style that uses kind of paid participants to demonstrate protest in some way in furtherance of whether it's a company's PR, whether it's a kind of PR stunt to get attention, or whether it's for kind of a political or social cause. So that's what we're best known for. And, I'm kind of, I'll admit I'm kind of doing the rounds, doing a lot of podcasts lately. And I'll tell you why is because there's so much misinformation about my business because, as you can imagine, protest is such a big topic right now, and there's this idea of like, oh my God, he's paying protesters, bad, right? And what I want to do is unpack some of that and kind of rebut a lot of the misinformation that people kind of have heard about our company. So that's why I've kind of been like, you know what? Let me just go on a ton of podcasts and talk to people and kind of evangelize my message. And some might disagree, but I hope to kind of speak to as many people as possible.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I like that you're talking about that, because I'm sure you've heard, especially during not the 2024 cycle, but 2020. You had
Yeah.
a lot of the protests and everything that were happening against at the time President Trump were, I mean, again, I don't know how the truth is because you can read one way or the other depending how you want to
Yeah.
cherry pick the response.
Hmm.
But were those things really like scripted and paid for, like he was trying to say?
Well, okay, so let's unpack that a little bit. So, behind every social political cause, there's a ton of money, right? So, think about it this in United States context, right? You have extraordinarily wealthy people on the right and extraordinarily wealthy people on the left. And more, these extraordinarily wealthy people and aligned corporate interests are trying to influence the system. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, if you interpret that positively, you say, hey, I've been a really successful person and I am working to make our country a better place, right? And what I believe makes our country a better place is to have Trump as president, or maybe what I have believe makes our country a better place is to not have Trump as president. So either way, right? And of course, in America, we have these sort of freedoms to involve ourselves, right? So the fact that behind every movement is a billionaire or multiple billionaires or corporations does not delegitimize the movement. So whether it's the Tea Party that was started by the Koch brothers, right? MAGA has a ton of very wealthy donors, the Palm Beach guys, whatever, right? But of course, so now you're referring to in your question, somewhat of the BLM people in the summer of 2020. Of course, that was backed by corporate America and left wing billionaires, right? Now, the fact that there's a billionaire that attaches themselves or multiple does not delegitimize the cause, right? It's sort of like the concept of political donation. There is this chicken and egg problem is, do the politicians respond to the donors, or do the donors back the politicians that are on in their corner? But I think with the protest movement, part of it is also understanding what a protest is and a protest isn't, right? So what a protest is a way of getting attention and evangelizing your point of view, right? So if you protest outside, somewhere, let's just say the Capitol, right? And you have 10,000 people out there, you're going to get a lot of attention, right? Everyone in Congress is going to be like, wow, that's a lot of people. I mean, in the United, from an American context, 10,000 person protest is a big protest, right? In Europe, they have them every day. But in America, 10,000 people out on the streets outside the Capitol, it's a big deal, right? So you're going to get the attention of Congress. Media is going to amplify it, right? But the fact that 10,000 people are out there on one side of an issue, and let's just say, 1,000 are on the other side of the issue. Does that mean that America favors one side 10-1? No, it doesn't. And that's where a lot of misinterpretation takes place in terms of understanding what protest is. What protest is not a plebiscite, right? Is not an expression of these people are on one side protesting, these people are on the other side, and they're broadly reflective as some sort of scale model of what the country thinks. That's not how it works. Protest is like an advertisement. It's a way of saying, of raising awareness, getting attention, to push people to act, right? So protest accomplishes that when you get media attention, when you get people's attention, and hopefully you can make persuasive talking points. But I think anyone who draws this inference of because people are in the street, that's what the whole country thinks, that's not true, right? This is a country of 330 million plus people. Even if 2 million people gathered on the street to oppose Donald Trump, well, how many people voted for Harris in the election? Was it 70 million? Right? So it's like, yeah, of course there might be 2 million. That doesn't mean Donald Trump is unpopular. It might mean he's very unpopular among those people. Similarly, when Donald Trump cites his rally numbers, right? He says, oh, there was 50,000, there was 100,000 out. It's like, yeah, sure there was. That doesn't mean that's what the 50,000 or 100,000 of what did he get? 75 million votes? 80
Yeah,
million?
I believe
Right? So
75,
the point is,
76.
so of course it makes sense, but does the fact that 100,000 people come out to a Trump rally mean that the country is for Trump? No, it doesn't. So do you see where there's a
Yeah,
misinterpretation
most
going
definitely.
on in regards to what protest exactly means?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think part of the reason why that interpretation is out there is certain, I mean, actually really all media outlets, right? That are like, big
Well, of course. Yes,
with
you're so right.
they're gonna twist it to go, oh, hey, look, CNN's gonna say their thing, Fox is gonna say their thing, going, hey, look, everybody's supporting our cause. And, that's kind of where this show came in to kind of go, hey, whoa, it's not as much about, I mean, it is about that, right? But it's about like what's behind all that. And I'm not talking like an I got you what's behind you. I'm talking like, why are we stuck in this cycle? This cycle
Yeah,
of,
very fair.
because I use an example all the time of Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan, the human
Yeah,
political enemies. Tip O'Neill, the hardcore Democrat, obviously Reagan's a Republican,
yep,
but they had dinner every week and they figured out how to compromise. Where it seems like these
yeah.
days, I could have the winning lottery numbers, and if I'm a Republican and you're a Democrat, you're automatically going to call me a fraud.
Right, that's absolutely right, that's absolutely right, and you're right that there was that era of bipartisanship or whatever you wanna call it, but I think what's interesting is if you're a political historian, it sounds like you have a little bit of a
To a degree, yeah.
historical you have to understand the political realignment that constantly is happening, right? So, you are right that those 2 got together, and part of it is the structure, right? I mean, I was about to say segregationists versus non-segregationists, but even some of them had bonds, which is kind of weird because you think of segregation, of course, as completely outside what's called the Overton window. But like a lot of these senators, right in the 60s, you had, I mean, if you think about the debates that they were having then, they were far more hardcore than the debates now, right? You're talking about the rights of African American people in this country, right, were being discussed. And I mean, it doesn't get more sensitive than this concept that there should be segregation, which is kind of an abomination, right? But even within that context, there was, I mean, although I'm kind of correcting myself a couple times because even I would say there's this perception, it's easy to kind of look at things nostalgically, but in
Always.
the 60s and 70s, there were a web of political assassinations, right? Of John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, John Lennon, which was sort of quasi-political, right? And
Yeah, they
many, many
forgot him.
other people. I mean, Harvey Milk, George Moscone, many, many other people who are less well known as well. So there was an immense amount of polarization and political violence at the time, but the media was not part of it so much because the media there were only the 3 news channels, right, at the time, so the media tended to try to play things down the middle. So that's just sort of some historical context for the division, but certainly the division in my lifetime has gone up, and I would say that the kind of there are a few focal points where the division has gone up. Right, number one, the election of President Obama in '08, that it started kind of this kind of fractiousness where the Republicans kind of opposed him with sort of a viciousness that you hadn't seen before, right? Of like basically anything he does is bad, right? I mean, for example, they called Michelle Obama's vegetable garden Marxist, right? Whereas like which is absurd, of course. And I mean, if you think about that, now they're hailing those same things when it comes from RFK Jr., right? But
Yeah,
then
that's
let's
a
say
political shift happened over the last 4 years, like
very
it did
much
in the
so.
six.
And then now it kind of reached a fever pitch with the sort of the 2016 election, where you kind of had, the emergence of Trump derangement syndrome of sorts, right? And I mean, it's so funny. I was having a conversation with someone on the left about this, and they actually made the good point of Trump derangement. If you want to say Trump derangement syndrome, right, affects those on the left, it also affects those on the right, because I think it is Trump attachment syndrome has
Yes,
sort of also infected those on the right, where it's kind of like,
1000%.
so you have people on both sides who are basically become have a lot of trouble kind of hanging out and having a reasonable dialogue with one another. But that's kind of continued to increase over the past several years, where it's like, more and more people are like, hey, if you're on the other side, I don't want anything to do with you. And obviously, that's not a good thing.
Yeah, and kind of like you were touching on, like 2016 and the presidents. It was like I was talking to my wife and my mother-in-law and a couple other people. Oh, in Michigan, that's where I'm from, a little south of Detroit. So, obviously, big manufacturing base. The trade policies over the last 30 years have like gutted, the state. And so I think that's why a lot of people here voted for Trump, because he's the first president, agree or not agree. Not, I'm not asking, just he's the first one that's actually taken action on China beyond campaign words. And I think that's why the working class has shifted, because they're going, hey, our plight is actually, even though I don't like this guy, he's actually out there trying something. And I feel like
Right,
that's
right,
what
he's doing
shifted it.
something different. Yeah, sure. I think that's probably right. I mean, I think the Democrats' embrace of kind of niche social issues. I mean, I'm not exactly giving novel political analysis by saying that the Democrats' embrace of niche social issues has probably hurt them among a lot of people. But I also think, like, to be blunt, right, the other kind of challenges, if you're a working class white American, you're not gonna you don't want to be lectured by Oprah that you're the oppressor and she's the oppressed, right? Like, Oprah is not oppressed. Oprah is one of the wealthiest people in the entire planet, right? So this idea that you're being lectured by Oprah or Michelle Obama or whatever, even though they are of course not reflective of black voices, right? But this perception that, hey, the Democrat elite, right, of Kamala and Oprah or Meghan Markle, I mean, whatever, those type of people. And they're basically saying, oh, we're oppressed, you're the oppressor. It's like, wait a second. I don't feel at all like the oppressor. I probably, if anything, am more oppressed. So I think that that sentiment is not an unreasonable sentiment.
Yeah.
And
Have you ever heard of the musician Tom McDonald?
of course. Oh, yeah, he's very
I
well. He's kind of
I
like the
I love
Eminem
him.
of today. His style is like Eminem in the late 90s, actually, of kind of Eminem,
Yes.
like very out there, very vulgar, you know, but also kind of makes some interesting points and speaks to those issues.
Yeah, and he kind of aligns with how you were talking. I mean, he's just kind of like, hey, it's both. He conservative, yeah, but to a point. But he's not dedicated to any one thing. And I
Well,
really
yeah,
liked he exemplifies the toxicity in not just like politics, just in general, even his own music. Just it's so toxic. And I guess why I'm asking that is so like he's even talked about like all these protests before and stuff. And so from like part of your I believe your book is, or I'm sorry, not your book, but your company, Crowds on Demand. You know, if you were talking to somebody like somebody that's just, I would say like not like me, right? Somebody who kind of tries to look into a lot of things, but may not be a pro at something like that. If you want to say like layman's terms, right? Like how would you put that to like somebody, because a lot of people are gonna be like, well, anybody can say anything, right? But how do you make them believe what you're trying to say? Like, hey, this is what it really is.
Well, I'll tell you a couple things that we do at Crowds on Demand. Number one, everyone who engages with our demonstrations believes in the cause. And I've seen the process by which our people call each and every one of the people demonstrating and are like interviewing them. I call it a reverse jury questionnaire because they're literally being interviewed to make sure that they are biased. A jury questionnaire typically makes sure you're not biased. So basically, we make sure that you believe what you are espousing. Right. So we try to do that. And look at our record. We've been in business for 13 years and not had a single kind of illegal activity. We've not ever engaged in violence. Right. That's part of why I'm coming on
Was
it.
to
So
you.
I think there's a lot of misinformation that people, because I think this again, it's why I'm here, is that a lot of people think paid protesting, okay, that's bad. When you really think about it, being paid to do your job is not bad. If you believe in your job, getting paid is not a bad thing. Right. So and when you're genuine about it, right? So that's kind of what we do, and we're also increasingly selective about what the causes we take on and the people we bring in. So I think when we started, and as a lot of businesses start, we took on any cause more or less as long as it wasn't terribly hateful, and we would bring in any warm bodies out there. We operate very differently now, right? Because what we want to do is we want to be we are kind of a one of a kind marketing agents, publicity agency that really can take causes and take companies to the next level through our innovative style of marketing, right? Using kind of demonstrations, using PR stunts, using kind of the power of people, right? And in order to do that, we have to conduct ourselves in a kind of proper manner. And that's what we do. I mean, there's a reason we've been in business third.
That is that's a long time. I guess so, because there's been a lot of, and obviously based on some of the process, I'm sure being your industry that you've seen, a lot of them have turned violently, in the last probably 10
That's right.
years. Are those like kind of like sketchy companies that do things like that, or
Yeah, well, it's a good question. So, number one is you have to keep in mind that there are certain kind of what I call anarchists, basically psychopaths who attach themselves to left and right.
oh yeah.
They just want to create chaos. I mean, my theory is they were there on January 6th. They were there in the BLM, right? Where basically these are apolitical. They see an opportunity to create chaos and loot and whatever, and they want to be there. They don't really care. Certainly not Republicans versus Democrats, right? Number one. Number two, certainly both sides have their share of bad actors who are so blinded with rage that they want to take up, that they can justify to themselves illegal activity, right? And whether that is on the mild side, blocking roads or vandalizing, or on the radical, even further radical side of engaging in physical violence toward another individual, right? I condemn all of those and we don't participate in all of those. But I think a lot of times you have a small minority in these groups that might want to do that, right? And that is very unfortunate because it allows a lot of people to then get colored in the same brush. They call it reducto ad absurdum in Latin. It's you're reducing somebody to the most extreme element of it, right? So if you take, I don't know, the QAnon shaman on the right, or you take, those total whack jobs on the left,
Yeah.
there was some like hippie that was like blocking this like single black mom trying to get to work in New York. And he was mocking her when she was like, I have to get to my job. He's like, what is a job? Like, like it's easy to reduce both sides to those people in an attempt to delegitimize the broader concerns of each group. Whereas I don't necessarily believe in that. And part of using the benefit of using crowds on demand is we tend to not provide people like that. Our people are articulate, they're well dressed, they believe in the cause, and they're going to evangelize the cause. But you referred earlier in the program to the fact that the media, the biased media, is going to cover what works for them, right? So if you have 100 protesters on the right, MSNBC is going to interview the two dumbest, right? And will amplify that, or vice versa for right-wing media and a left-wing protest, right? So keep in mind that your whatever source of information you're listening to is biased. And if you're trying to delegitimize the protesters, you don't have to look far because there's dumb people on every side.
Right. No, 1,000%. Part of like something you talked about that I've read is the No Kings versus Good Trouble.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of like elaborate on that, because I know some of it's been about like Trump being a dictator, things
Hmm.
like this. And understand, like, I'm open and honest. Did I vote for him? Yes. I probably don't agree with him like 60, 70% of what he says.
Right.
But there's some key
You would
things that
say you would disagree with Harris 80 or 90%, maybe.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I feel like Harris's heart was definitely in the right place. I just, as soon as she was on The View and they asked her what she would change and she said nothing, I told my wife right then and there, I said, she lost. I said, Donald Trump could burn every house to the ground. She lost. People are, saying, hey, we're hurting money wise. You just literally said to them on national TV, I'm not going to change anything. Well,
Right,
of
right.
course, they're all just going to flock to the other way.
Well, I think more people need to be willing to be independent voters personally. And I always advocate this to my clients. Um, I advised some of the leaders of uh, BLM, Black Lives Matter, about 10 years ago. And I told them, you guys, if you want to make your movement successful, what you should do is say the Black community is no longer aligned with the Democrats. We will align with who supports us, and we're going to be independent voters until we until we are someone actually starts doing something for us,
I hear
right?
that on a lot of YouTube channels. Like, so I listen
Right?
to like a lot of YouTube commentary.
Like if you did business
Big
with a
time, big
company,
time.
I mean, think about it this way. If you did business with a company that treated you like the Democratic Party treats Black people, and would you be in business with them for 60 years, right? So Black African Americans have voted predominantly Democrat for 60 years, right? And would you be in business because they did something for you 60 years ago, right? And
Right.
and since then they've created chaos in Black neighborhoods through the defund the police, through so through the a lot of the policies, the welfare policies that have made it harder for the families, right? So what I've said, number one, do that. Number two, economic inclusion, economic ownership, right? Stress ownership, because if you're a swing voter and you have ownership and wealth, now you can tell both parties, hey, this is what we demand. And we're going to vote for who gives us what we want, right? We don't have any historical allegiance just because the Democrats pushed the civil rights bill in 1964. That's 61 years ago, right? That's the last thing the Democrats have done positive for Black Americans, in my personal opinion.
Yeah.
But in fairness, but I just want to be very clear that I don't think Republicans have done anything for Black people
Yeah.
either. You
No,
know
they
what I
haven't done
mean?
neither one.
So
It's like the end of the 60s hit, and you had like a little blip with Ronald Reagan. And then,
didn't do anything for Black people.
right. Well, I talked like terms of like trying to do things for people. And then
Yeah,
everybody
I
else
think a
just
lot.
seems like lip sync.
Yeah, no president has. I think the reason why Trump did somewhat better with certain Black male voters is because the same thing that you said. Hey, at least he's trying to speak to us, and um I don't think he's done anything for them, but to tell you the truth, but But again, I think there's a huge value. I'm just using black voters as one example because I think everybody should be independent. I think rural voters need to be independent from the Republican Party. I don't know why. Like I don't. I've been to a lot of rural America, and I don't see them benefiting from Donald Trump. So why do you keep voting for him 80, 90%? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Like the same
it's
like
perception.
Democrats have done to urban America, Republicans have done to rural America. Like why is there no development there? Why is the use of methamphetamines, like the drug crisis, the opioid crisis? Republicans were in bed with the opioid manufacturers, right? So I'm like, so I just want to be clear, I'm not singling out the Democratic Party for criticism. The Republican Party hasn't done anything for their core rural constituents who they claim
Oh
to
yeah, no,
love so much, you
yeah.
know?
I mean, they'll leave us all hanging out to dry and not think twice about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I guess being there's a real benefit in saying I'm a free agent, you know,
Hey,
and
that's
and I will vote for who I think is right. And that's how I am, by the way. I'm an independent, and same with Crowds on Demand with how the causes that we choose to take on. You know, I'm not a we are not a right wing or left wing firm. You know, I like to be on the side of common sense where the conservatives are right, you know, like we need law enforcement, you know, we need more funding for law enforcement, not less funding, right? I'll be with them where the Democrats are right, such as healthcare. Like we need help, we need, you know, we can't have people dying on the streets because they don't have healthcare, right? So I'm happy to advocate on the side of whoever's on the side of common sense.
yeah,
And I'm happy to use to work, you know, for people who advocate for that.
so, in this show, it's like, we're big on the middle ground, right? That's just kind
Yeah,
of
I
like,
like it.
that's the brand. That's what it's about. And and this is again, just like a personal opinion. I feel that there's a lot more people in the middle of the road than
Yeah.
there are extremists, but their voice is just, I don't even want to say not heard. It's just not wanting to be heard by
Well, I also think
everybody
we're
up top.
constantly I think middle ground people need to figure out a way to not have to vote for one of two extreme candidates
Yes.
each time. And the last time we had an election between two middle ground candidates was probably Obama versus Romney or Obama versus McCain, right?
Yeah.
And before where you had two people who were generally advocating, we're not disparaging each other's supporters, right? Like if you think about both Biden and Trump regularly disparage each other's supporters, right? I mean, Biden called them domestic terrorists, right? He said the biggest threat was from within. I mean, I don't have enough time on this program to cite everything Donald Trump has said about his political opponents, you know, but there is this concept of like, you know, both Biden and Trump never even tried to unify the country. And a lot of other presidents have tried and failed, but Donald Trump and Joe Biden never even tried. And what I think I would like to see is a leader that says, I'm going to try. I might not succeed 100%, but but I don't want to live in a country where 50% of the people think I'm safe.
Yeah. No, I 1,000% agree. Yeah, is it because I know, our time's getting a little tight here. The $20 million protest that, said that you turned down. Obviously, as we'll make the little final segment as we wrap up. Tell us about
Yeah.
that.
Well, here's the thing with that. I look at it as kind of someone who's fairly egotistical about my work. I only like to attach myself to good projects, right? I mean, it's why you're not seeing George Clooney in like the X-Men, right? It's like I'm sure they'd pay him a ton of money to do it, but he's like, I got enough money. I don't need to attach myself to some stupid superhero movie, right? So I guess I would put myself in that category where I am in no way against taking on demonstrations to kind of raise awareness of the flaws of Donald Trump's administration. So I am in no way a MAGA stand person. But what I don't like to do is just be part of the noise. And what I saw was there was no nuance. It was just like get people in the streets to protest Trump just as we've been protesting him for 10 years without result, right? Whereas I want to do something more clever, more intelligent, and to really be a lot more effective. And they were not going for it. So I kind of said, hey, I politely have to decline to do this.
Right. I mean, that's so is the $20 million. So like is that like kind of like an average price tag for some of these things? I mean, obviously I know every
Depends. I mean,
budget's
it's
different,
on
but
the high end, I would put it. Number one,
okay.
I think it's on the high end. I mean, and I just want to be very clear is that it's not like that would all money would have gone to me, right? Like obviously we that would be that was a the kind of purport price of the
Right.
brought the engagement, right? And obviously we would then have to be on the hook to compensate all these people. So it's not like I was going to walk away with 20 million bucks
Oh, yeah.
in my pocket, but just to be clear, but I guess I don't want your listeners thinking I'm more virtuous than I am. Uh, the but the point is that ultimately in terms of how it compares to our average engagement price, it's on the high side, right? So we will regularly do, I mean, we'll regularly do stuff 50,000, 100,000, few $100,000, $1 million, couple million, right? 20 million, obviously on the very high side, but you have to consider that this was a multi-city, thousands of people involved kind of thing, right? So you have to consider the scale of what was being asked. I mean, if you think about it, like people are like, "Oh my God, you $20 million, like that's so much for protest." But think about the Super Bowl ad. A Super Bowl ad is like 10 million bucks, right? And that gets way less visibility than a nationwide protest with thousands of people, right? So you have to think about it more in the context of advertising than in any other context. But our average crowd size is 50 to 100 people, right? On behalf of a company, on behalf of a cause. We're not, you know, but we obviously will do the larger ones as well.
Right. And that's a whole lot of cash, man. Kudos to you for standing up for what you believe in. A lot of people sell out for a buck, if they can.
Yeah, it's not my style. I've done a lot of deals that I regret earlier on in my career, and it always catches up to you. I'd rather be more selective. It costs me money to do it. It really does. And there are people who have told me like, Adam, I can't believe you said no to this or that thing. And we often get in the news for what you say no to. But I'm like, there's a reason we've been in business 13 years, and it's because we're selective. And increasingly, if I want to be in business in 10 years time from now, it's because we stuck true to our values.
Yeah, no, I mean the world needs more people like that. I mean, you do your job, but you care more about doing things the right way and in a professional. I'm trying to think of the right way to put it. In a professional without coming off like a jerk. I mean,
Yeah,
whereas a
we have
lot of people
professional
these
ethics.
days, yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
we're in the business of marketing and persuasion. We are
yes,
not in the business of noise and intimidation. So
that's
that's
great.
that's how I would describe it.
No, and again, I appreciate you coming on here, Adam, because
My pleasure.
we need more people like you. And I generally I'm like, okay, I pick certain types of people that come on here. The ironic part is I tend to lean conservative, but Democrats seem like coming on my show more than Republicans.
I'm neither. I have long left the Democratic Party, but I won't associate with the Republican Party. I mean, I'll work with Republican
Oh
causes and
yeah,
Democratic causes, but I have no allegiance, and I plan never to have allegiance,
yeah.
unless
I flipped both ways. I did vote for Obama the first term. His first term, I
yeah,
was a little dissuaded when he gave money to the banks.
yeah, yeah.
His exact phrase was, "We want to retain talent," and I'm like, the people who bankrupted everything.
Well,
I
yeah.
guess that's not my version of talent, but
Well, at the end of the day, disappointed a lot of people on the left. And with that, well, what I would say is Occupy was actually one of the least successful protest movements of all time. I've been saying this a lot, where if you think about how many people went into the streets in Occupy, '09, 2010,
oh yeah,
thousands, hundreds of thousands, and they accomplished jack squat, right?
yeah,
And this was with a left wing president and a Democratic, I think it was almost a super majority in both chambers of the legislature. So with these guys, the failure, I'm going to leave your audience with, if, obviously this is the work we do, but I'm going to give some free advice only to your audience. If you have a protest that you want to do or advocate for, be very specific in your demands and target the right people who have the power to give you those demands, and do not give them any way to just get out of it with lip service, right? So when Occupy was talking about it, it was like, oh yeah, the 1% is bad. And it allowed a lot of politicians to pay lip service and say, oh yeah, the 1%, we don't like the 1% either. But without action, the 1% got even richer. You know what I mean? And they
Yeah.
got, so at the end of the day, if you have the opportunity, if you to advocate for a cause, be really specific with your demands and do not let them off the hook with lip service.
No, awesome. And I
They'll always
appreciate
try to
that.
give you lip service.
Yeah, no. And you know what? Hopefully we can get you back on here again down the road, but I appreciate you taking your time out of your day, Adam.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. And
All right.
you have a good one, and
All
best
right.
to you and your listeners.
Thank you. You have a good one, Adam. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Bye bye.